We are to a discussion session, open data when master meets masters. 那我们有2位贵宾呢在台上，第一位再次跟各位介绍是我们英国 ODI 主席 Sir Nigel Sheba, Chairman and Co-founder of the Open Data Institute. Sir, 19。然后我们在这一场这里担任我们的主持人呢是行政院政务委员张善政张政委 ，Minister of the Executive Yuan。我们现在就将时间交给张政委来我们主持，有请。
Okay, the next 30 minutes, I would like to ask some questions. Maybe you can ask me some questions and see if we're doing the right thing.
Right.
Let me give you a very quick update on Taiwan's open data for the next couple of minutes. As I mentioned in the opening, we initiated this project, this open data initiative, late last year, and we require every government organization to prepare by the end of this past March 5 items of open data. It's their own decision; they can take whatever data on hand, and then by the end of this month, 50 items. Okay, again, up to their own choice of what they want to be open with. The first question that comes in mind is some departments will pick the easy items. Okay, you mentioned that one very important thing is to do the inventory. They have to run through the list of the data that's on hand and decide what they can open. So I noticed some government ministries pick the easy ones. Okay, the choice of schools, things like that. Some other departments are picking the real good ones. Now, I would like to have your comment on two things. First of all, this kind of sort of more voluntary type of scheme, is it the best way? And then next maybe, how do you really incentivize them to really pick the good items to be open?
Okay, well, those are all very great questions. I think, first of all, congratulations, because I think having a program that applies across government and completely across government is important. How you begin the process, begin the journey, you started by inviting them to volunteer. And that can be powerful. I mean, one thing you see is that sometimes government departments like to compete. That can also happen. In the UK, we didn't go for the voluntary approach. Interestingly enough, we took a view, in fact, the Prime Minister took the view that there were going to be clear commitments to particular data being published. There wasn't a debate about it. They simply had to produce particular types of data. Now that was quite powerful because some of the data was difficult to release, but they had to do it. In other cases, there was a feeling that this was another thing they had to do. So really you do need a balance. It needs to be a coalition of the willing. You do need to recognize that this can be a difficult cultural change. It's not always about the technology, it's often about the attitude. You mentioned incentivization. This is, I think, really critical. We have to recognize that if we're going to become a data-dependent society, data-dependent economy, data-dependent government, we've got to reward people, promote them, recognize them, reward them for the efforts they put into preparing and publishing high-quality data. I think it's really important that we build into the way in which we review and evaluate people that facet, build it into their performance records in some sense. The other thing I would suggest is that inventories are very powerful. If you don't want to insist on particular data, then insist that there is at least an inventory of those data sets, except the very, very sensitive ones that departments believe they hold. Some departments won't even know what data they have, okay? And in the UK, we've required all departments to produce inventories or lists, data sets of the data they have. And just last month, we published a very interesting data set as open data. It is the data set of all data sets that are not published, okay? And that has got a lot of interest, Actually, not every data set is in there, but I can't talk about those.
Okay, I think there is something to learn from that. Let me switch to Mandarin for a couple of minutes. 研考会在这边呢，考会在这边。This smiling guy there, he is the deputy director for pushing this open data. And from your talk, I can note several things we can do. First of all, we need to stimulate some competition between government organizations. So maybe there should be some award. Maybe we can do some survey. Which government department is producing the most useful, giving out the most useful open data? Maybe ODA can help do that. And then second of all, we should compile a list of unopened data. What data categories are not open at this moment, and why they are not open? Okay, if they're classified, sure, they're not open, but otherwise they should try to be open as much as possible. Right? So maybe that's something we can think about. Another question that comes to mind is about ODI. What was the initial motivation to set up ODI, and in the process of UK government's open data initiative, what role does ODI play in that process?
So the ODI has an interesting history. Tim Berners-Lee and I both believed there needed to be an independent organization that could act as a place where a whole range of people could come together to address the challenges around open data. So different stakeholders. We needed a physical place to do that, and we needed as well to develop a strong open data culture. A lot of this was happening, but if it could be one place where there was a focus on bringing different people together. But the real reason I mentioned in my talk that we believed it was important was we needed to help develop the demand side. Because demand side, people often believe governments publish the data and they will come. It isn't like that, actually, that many organizations need to understand what the value in the data is. We need to give them role models. We need to give them examples of how to use the open data assets. It isn't the case that all industry is aware that these opportunities exist. So we have found that development of the demand side from startups to existing mature companies and a dialogue with them to be really important. And the other thing I would say is training. Training around not just the technology but the policy issues. Training not just for company people but also for government people in particular. Because there are some easy ways in which you can publish the data well, and there are some easy ways to make publishing it much more difficult and less value. So I think the reason that we saw it as important was also what we've noticed is that since we've existed, just the sheer amount of international interest. I mean, what we didn't anticipate was the sheer number of countries who wanted to look at what we were doing and what we were experiencing, what was and wasn't working. So we have already set up 13 nodes in different countries. And we've written down our principles. So the ODI trademark you can use if you adopt basic principles, and you can be at different levels in the membership structure. But essentially, if you want to use the ODI trademark and you adopt a set of principles around standards, values, and process, and of course, because we're an open data institute, they're all published in GitHub. So you can actually go and look at the template for how we operate in that organization.
Okay. I think there's some similarity between ODI and ODA, right? In ODA, I think you also try to bring the industry to understand what the Taiwan government is releasing and then feedback what's missing or what's required. Financially, how do you sustain ODI?
That's a really good question. How do we financially sustain it? So we were very fortunate. We persuaded the Chancellor of the Exchequer, the Finance Minister, George Osborne. We persuaded him to release £10 million of funding. That is, what is £10 million? How much?
50 million, no, 500 million.
500 million. Okay, so 500 million. over 5 years, so it's £2 million a year of public money. We have to match that from other sources, so this isn't a huge amount of money, but it's enough that we could start an organisation, we could establish a presence, we have a great team, but we are not going to be a public body depending on public money forever. We want to develop a business model. So how does that work? We need to match our funding. We've received about 1.8 million in our first year of a mixture of other research funding, contracted research, membership fees. We think that probably there is a very strong commercial model in our licensing of open data certificates, but we haven't developed that yet. We'll be looking to develop products and services. So just because we're open doesn't mean we're not going to be trying to generate revenue. We suspect we will be able to attract more public funding, but we absolutely do believe we have to become self-sustaining. We do, of course, start to detect an interest in the companies we're incubating. Now, at this position, at this moment, we don't take an equity position in the companies we incubate, because we think that would, in a sense, get in the way. But there is an interesting question about whether we start to develop a fund, an investment fund around to give more opportunities to invest in these companies, and that might have a for-profit component. So we see a number of organisations now around the world that have a not-for-profit and a for-profit component. We haven't worked all the details of that out yet, but we're certainly exploring a whole range of options. Subscription model also is quite an important part of our activity, and also the income from training is going to be quite significant, we think.
I think it's quite coincident that you mentioned you received £1.8 million in the first year. It's almost exactly the same amount we allocate to IDB for the first year. 1.8 million is about 19 million NT. So IDB's 我也觉得第一年预算也是9000万。And also the work you mentioned about ODI seems to be a combination of ODA and IDB. IDB also at this moment is trying to encourage some proposals, and maybe at the later stage of proposals, if the idea sounds good, we may try to incubate them in some way if they are new companies or something like that. So, but I think at this moment in Taiwan we do not have any income from the non-government source. So maybe that's something we can think about. Maybe not in the first several years, but eventually in the long run, I think maybe not IDB, but maybe Open Data Alliance. When you run so for a couple of years, maybe there's some possibility for guest funding.
Yeah, I think that's important. I think you have to be able to demonstrate to government and to your funders that this is actually something that people are willing and interested enough to pay cash for, and I think that is important. And I think the thing we were very lucky about is that 10 million or the $500 million was an amount of money where we could be sustained and confident for a period of time. So it has helped us not to be running around all the time worrying about securing funding, but we're very conscious that if we're going to convince our business and politicians that there really is value in open data, we have to show and demonstrate success. So we have to produce those companies, we have to show how companies existing can make real money out of open data.
I guess after your talk, ODA and IDB, they are very pressured to do the things at least as good as yours. Tell me something about this international nodes you mentioned. What kind of relationship are you trying to build up internationally?
So we've got as I say, we have a charter model essentially, and you can look at the charter. It's on the ODI website. We have a 3-tier level, so you can become a basic node, allowed to use the ODI logo as a communication node. Essentially, you're communicating stories about the value of open data to the community. You can be an intermediate level node by using the logo, but also the trademark, but also by engaging in specific project work around an open data project. The highest level is what we call a country tier level, where we are looking for something in country that is like the ODI would be in the UK. So that would be receiving funds, sustainable funds from government, able to talk to government policy ministers, able to talk to standards bodies, able to talk to, and of course at the moment we don't have any other examples. We have one or two. We have two in beta. So we have a United States have an ODI beta, which is interesting. It has the support of the White House, Knight Foundation funding, and we're using that as a model to see how we would build an ODI in the US. Now, that's the kind of, what we're looking for is not to rush too fast, but to build a mesh network, a network of organizations that can all help, a family of ODIs who can all help promote the message, promote best practice, share experience, work with other organizations that are doing the kind of things that are happening here in other countries. And we're trying to use the web as a model of how to build our ODI network. Decentralize, but have a degree of common standards so that people understand what they're striving to achieve.
So I don't know how much you understand about RODA. Maybe Dr. Peng has told you. What tier of this nodes would you expect RODA to be at?
Well, I mean, I would suspect we've been having some preliminary conversations around this. I know with colleagues from Taiwan. I would say at the very least you're a level 2 node, and potentially. But of course, the thing is, to what extent you'd even want to consider being recognized as a level 3 node, and that is about partly having a sustainable and provable way. You were just talking about it. Is there a way to sustain, generate, and generate a continuing business model that allows you to exist? Yeah.
That's very interesting. You have any questions on Taiwan's?
Well, I'm fascinated to know. I'm always fascinated to know. Every country finds some aspects of open data much easier than we do, and in other areas it finds things more challenging. So I'd be interested to know, for example, what's the particular challenge around open data in Taiwan? Is there one specific challenge? And is there are there specific data sets that people all want but just don't seem to be appearing? People talked about, somebody talked to me about contract data, government contracts. In the UK, that was quite a controversial data set because governments, companies would say, the contracts are commercially confidential. But when they're awarded, the view was that, no, if you're going to compete for public money, you should be able to put your contract into the open. So we now have a system where Open Contract Finder, you can find any contract awarded in the UK government, it is open, okay? I'm just intrigued to know what are the difficult data sets in Taiwan and what are the successes?
Okay, maybe Dr. Peng or Howard, you can add something. Let me, well, not directly answering your question. So far, it seems to me the most popular type of data is geospace, geographic information related. I'm not sure about contract data. What's the requirement from ODA you sense so far is the most demanding type of data?最期待的是哪一类的？
Okay, for example, health data.
Health. It's quite sensitive. I'm working on that. Health related because I don't know if you know, we have a national health insurance program that every citizen is part of. And so whenever you go to a clinic, a hospital, those data are collected. And definitely those data are very valuable for research purpose, for understanding the health trend. As you mentioned in your talk, it involves privacy, right? So you don't want, so how do you balance that?
Well, that's a very good question too. I mean, I think geospatial is always one of the core data sets to release. Your mapping data is spatial data, geospatial data is the connective tissue of the data sets. Everything happens somewhere, and so you need good mapping data. We had a real challenge actually getting mapping data released because in the UK, our mapping agency used to charge for all of the data.
Same here, same here.
And you know, one of the real problems are mapping agencies that have historically in different countries always charged because they run their operation based on the revenue. Now in the US, mapping agency never had that problem. Federal data was always openly available. It allowed them not to have many of the battles that we have in the UK, you may have here, and many countries I know have this challenge. About 45% of all the map data, different types of map data in the UK now is openly available. The very highest resolution isn't, and some other particular data isn't, but in general, the users wanted medium resolution, comprehensive data. They now have that. But I would say that geospatial crucial. We found that transport data is extremely popular as well. So we had a strange situation in the UK where many transport services were privatized. And when the privatization happened, although many of these are still publicly subsidized, the contracts didn't specify that the data would stay open. So big lesson here, actually I should have mentioned, big lesson is if government is going to contract services to the private sector and government money is paying for those services, always write a contract such that the data about the services remains open. Because many times companies will lock the data down and then just extract a monopoly rent or not even do anything with it. So we now have transport data openly available for trains, timetables, fares. If you don't have the fare data, you can't even write an application to find the best fare deal to get from A to B. You know, and it's not always in a company's interest to release the best way, the cheapest way. So transport data is very popular.
I'm a little bit surprised because I imagine in order to attract more passengers.
You would think so. Actually,
so.
we used to say to them, we had some fantastic arguments about this. I can't tell you all the arguments, but with our railways in particular, they had a little division that would make money out of selling these apps. And they were more interested in the little amount of money they could make out of selling poor apps than putting people on the bloody trains. So I absolutely agree. Absolutely agree.
I think at least our railroad administration is a little bit ahead of yours. I think if our audience ever tried to get a train timetable in the past, several years ago, they used to be sold at something like 20 NT per timetable. Now they're free. They can be claimed for free at any ticket window, right? So
yeah, that's great. I mean, and this is great. And it's seen, well, also that data is now open in the UK. We've seen the value as well. We've calculated exactly how much value the London transport data has achieved for the economy. It's millions and millions of pounds of additional funding.
Yeah. So I have mentioned our railway administration, 铁路局. I noticed on the website now they even allow the timetable to be downloaded with a certain format. I forgot what, but at least a machine reading format. And so the added value people can download it. A more sensitive type of transport data is, for example, take our freeway. Our freeway tolling system is going to be changed in months from a toll station to mileage. And so when you drive to the freeway, you see all these gates that picks up your location, and I think those data will be very, very useful, but again very sensitive because sometimes I don't want my wife to know where I am.
He didn't really say that, did he? Well, you mentioned the really important issue around privacy, and it relates to health and transport data. This is a really interesting area because there are many, many types of health data which are very valuable but don't relate to individuals. So the infection rates in hospitals are a good example, or all sorts of basic information about disease prevalence. You can also aggregate data. So one of the important things the government can do is take individual data and aggregate it or anonymize it in a way that you can then begin to use it. So we're working very hard in the UK to make much of this valuable data available in an anonymized way, such that patient privacy isn't violated, because you're so right, it's so important. But you know, the thing about privacy is that people are also sometimes prepared to give quite a lot of detailed information away in return for something back. In the UK now we have specific insurance products for cars. You can put a GPS in your car and an insurance company will take detailed information on where you are, when you drive, how fast you drive, how hard you brake. And depending on your driver behavior, they will give you cheaper insurance. So they're differentiating the market of insurance products based on your type of driving. Now for young females in particular, who are heavily penalised in the UK because we're not allowed to differentiate young men and young women as drivers, but the young women are much safer. They're now actually being offered these very, very good deals from insurance companies, but it's very intrusive because now their dads know exactly where their daughters have been at all times. So you know, there are these trade-offs.
I don't like that. Okay, yeah. We have about 10 minutes more. Right? 10 minutes more. So I'd like to reserve some time for our audience. If there's any question for the audience would like to raise, I would be happy to take them. Yes, please. Lady over there.
Hello, I'm CL from the Zero V movement. So excellent talk, thank you so much, Shuttle. Some of the open data commercial models in your talk are about selling analyzed public sector data back to the public sector. So is there any difficulties in the procurement regulations that prevents government from buying from those innovative digital services from local startup or even internationally? So I'm pretty sure they are in Taiwan. So how do you remove those obstacles?
That's an interesting point. I'm not aware there are. One of the things that we've noticed is, you're exactly right. Some of the most interesting models are selling back insights into the public service. The other thing that's really important is to notice when sometimes departments suddenly realize the open data they're now publishing is more useful to them than it was before because it was locked into one place and other parts of government or other parts of the department couldn't access it. So allowing data to flow within the public sector is also extremely valuable. We don't have explicit procurement rules about getting analysis and insights back. Once it's made openly available, because we have an open license, this is where the license is so important. The license allows you to do anything with that data you like, including building a commercial service that you could sell back to government. So I think that's the way we tackle it. But if there are specific challenges in Taiwan, it would be interesting to understand them as a use case.
Well, before our next audience raise the question, you mentioned the license, because our agency right now helping to track a license across all departments. Do you have any recommendation on the guidelines of the license?
Yeah. I think there are. I mean, first of all, you know, keep them short and simple, and look at some of the templates. Yeah, I mean, the trouble is that when you say license, you then say lawyer, and but there are some good models out there of simple licenses. A number of them. Yeah. Okay, we can talk about that.
Short and simple, right? No lawyer.
Also, procurement. If you can do anything at all about changing government procurement processes, such that we've just done this in the UK, we're very pleased with this. We've required that all new government procurement in software has to commit to open standards and the publication of open data where possible. So you do, as a procurer of IT systems in government, have a very powerful position to write the open data principles into contracts, and I really encourage that approach.
Okay, good. Any questions from our audience?
I wonder that in UK, do you have any process to decide what data can be released? For example, do you form a committee or do you have some kind of group which you make such a decision?
Yeah, we do. We actually, it's a very interesting point because one of the things I've been hearing is that one thing you do here is ask people what they think they want, which is really important. We have a group in the UK called the Open Data User Group, which is supported by government, where these requests come through from a whole range of stakeholders. So listen to what the public wants. Although to drive your open data policy just on that, I think is a mistake. It's an important component, but as I say, the fundamental driver should be a public data principle that says open data is the default, okay? And if people say, well, it's expensive to do that, just point out that in the age of the web, data publishing is a marginal cost, okay? And if they aren't in a position to be able to provide data easily on the web, then they've got some broken processes. So I would say that user groups are important. We have also a transparency board, I sit on that, which is a central committee within government that also has independent advisors on it. One of them, Tim Berners-Lee, is another, who are pushing for data releases in particular areas all the time. And I think that government itself can be active. Activist groups like GovZero here, you need a place. That's why the ODI has been useful, to bring all the different voices together, because no one structure or organisation has all the answers, and they certainly don't have all the requests either.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, the gentleman in the back.
When Gavin Starks visited Taiwan in January, he also talked about the dual roles of the ODI. On one hand, it's a government-funded organization. On the other hand, it's a startup trying to earn its own bread. My question is the ODI, in essence, a state-owned company? And the following question is, what do you do if and when there is a conflict of interest between the company and the government?
Okay, good. This is not a state-owned company. It is a company limited by guarantee. It has no state ownership in any part of it, okay? That is really important. Are there conflicts? Well, it's interesting. Our minister, the minister responsible for transparency is Francis Maud, and he is the minister who in charge of the Cabinet Office. Francis Maud said when he opened the Open Data Institute, he said everybody's in favour of transparency when they're in opposition, but when they become a government, then it can be more difficult. Because you can have your feet held to the fire, okay? And I expect the Open Data Institute to hold our feet to the fire. Well, you know, generally things have been going well and they've been releasing data, but we had a big argument recently about a particular data set. This was a data set that the Post Office, the Royal Mail, the people who deliver our letters, the Royal Mail owned. It is all the legal addresses in the United Kingdom. That's a valuable data set. They've been put together over the years in public ownership, and we believed, the Transparency Board, the Open Data User Group, all the activists, we all believed, Tim and I wrote a letter to the Prime Minister, that this was a data set that should be made open and not sold with the Royal Mail into private ownership. It was sold with the Royal Mail into private ownership, okay? And my question is, how can you have an essential part of the information infrastructure owned by a particular company that always will charge a rent for that information? And if a state needs to know one thing, it's probably what all the legal addresses are, okay? So there's a good example of a bit of conflict and a bit of disagreement. In fact, we believe that over time we'll come to a position where we will have an open address file. And it also illustrates that the UK may be #1 in some of these league tables, but it doesn't do everything just the right way when it comes to open data publication, not as far as the open data evangelists are concerned anyway.
Okay. I know there's another question from, yes, please.
This is from Yichi. I have a question. I would like to ask Sir Najan to share an example that how ODI does to help a new startup company to be a successful open data company.
Good question. We don't. So we don't invest in them, okay, directly. What we do is we give them space. They take space in our premises. They get mentored. So we think it's really important they're physically in the space, because with all the other startups, okay, and with the people who are coming in to be trained, with the big companies that are coming in, with the most useful thing you can give a startup, unless it's very early stage, we have a set of stages. So we incubate them through a set of stages. typically, we have a 3-stage model, and they spend 3 months in each stage, and by the end of 9 months, they should be on their way, okay? But the model is mentoring. We believe the best form of investment for them is a contract, okay? Not just venture capital. We think the best thing we can do is give them contractual work to do. And because we have lots of people with open data and with challenges in the area coming into the organization, we're able to network for them. So we can very successfully put these companies in touch with potential clients. And the 2 examples I give you there are very good examples of companies that have basically grown in size quite dramatically and have really succeeded because they're known to be part of the ODI family. They get taken much more seriously by companies when they go to pitch.
Okay. I think we have time for only one last question. Is there any?
How do you set the KPI of ODI?
KPI? Oh, this is a great question. I just really wished I had my laptop open. We have a dashboard, a company dashboard, which is open, which shows the 12 KPIs of the company in real time, okay? Number of companies incubated, amount of commercial revenue generated, number of people trained, number of open data certificates issued. We have a list of very specific KPIs because we think that if we're going to convince people to keep investing, they have to see those numbers and they have to be going the right way. Somebody asked the question actually at the back there, which I didn't answer, which is what happens when people fall out of love with the idea of open data? Okay, you know, yesterday's good idea. We think if we can show the positive direction of these KPIs, we will continue to be successful. And so far, it's been a very good year. I hope it'll be an even better year coming up. All the indications are it should be. But that's exactly the right question. Number of data sets released, the quality of those data sets, certificates issued, number of people trained, and so on. So KPIs, I would really urge anyone who's in this area to think carefully about quantifiable KPIs, because fundamentally we also need, and I haven't talked about this much, but it's crucial, we need to show the evidence of impact of open data, and we need to show the strong stories. One of the reasons I probably get asked to do these talks a lot is that I have very good examples that people can understand. But those have been we've worked very hard to find those examples. So I think it's really important that, I've seen some from the ODA, the Open Data Alliance here, pick examples which people can quickly understand the value of why this data is better open than locked away.
I think that's a good question. I think Incentivization should also try to design a set of KPI for Taiwan governments so that 交通部 or 内政部, they all have the KPI for the open data. And so maybe that's your mission for next year. I think our time is almost up. I enjoyed this dialogue with you. I hope our audience also enjoys it. So before we finish, I think we have a small gift.
Yes. Yes. So well. Good, great, thank you very much to our guests on the panel. 谢谢两位贵宾的对谈。